Comparative Cultures, Sociology 4883, Religion in Society, Chapter 9, Religion and Economy. When it comes to religion in society, there is an economic component to religion. Um, Believers in the world religions all hold the value system of helping those who are in need, those who are disadvantaged and less fortunate should be given acts of charity. Um, there is an ancient story of the Good Samaritan, a person who is found on the side of the road and they've been beaten, they've been robbed, and the Good Samaritan helps this individual. And this tends to be a consistent theme throughout the religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. In Judaism, there is what's known as the tzedakah. And in the tzedakah, one gives 10 to 20% of their earnings to charity to help those who are less fortunate. In Christianity, there is what's known as the tithe, or 10% of one's earnings. In Islam, there's what's known as zakat, and zakat has to do with 2.5% of one's earnings that is given to charity. In many religions, poverty is seen as a virtue. Max Weber looked at this virtue as a theodicy of disprivilege or a theodicy of escape. That it is the people who are impoverished and are poor are more blessed than those that have more in terms of material substance and material wealth. And that wealth is not measured by the amount of material possessions that a person holds, but rather the amount of spiritual qualities that a person has is the true measure of wealth. In that same vein of thinking, true wealth cannot be measured in dollars and cents, but is spiritual and it is qualitative. Having salvation, having physical health, having peace of mind, having joy, all of these intrinsic qualities are more of a measure of faith when it comes to the theodicy of disprivilege. There also tends to be a condemnation of the rich. Jesus taught that it's hard for rich people to get into heaven. The Buddhists believe that material wealth is a product of one's past intentions and not what they do now. In the Hindu religion, the view that material wealth is a virtue as a result of karma in terms of how you treat others. Do you feel that it's possible for a person to be both good and to be wealthy? I'd love to hear your comments in that regard. There is also what's known as economic attitudes. David Moberg says that there are several ways religion influences our economic attitudes and behaviors. For example, the basis for ethics in the way that we conduct exchanges of goods, services, and we make business contracts and transactions in society. The virtues of honesty and fairness that are a product of our religious beliefs. Religion also stimulates the economy and consumption in terms of how we spend our money wisely. We live a frugal lifestyle within our means. Also having to do with the attitudes toward work, that it is a spiritual calling for us to lead productive lives. In our modern society, we have a phenomenon known as the prosperity gospel, and you might have a image that comes to mind when you think of the prosperity gospel. There are televangelists who epitomize wealth and materialism within the religious community, on television, on the internet, and on the airways. You see them exhibiting this opulence and wealth, and uh, present it in a way that this is desirable as a believer in God, and that believers and religious people should seek prosperity and wealth. Karl Marx, on the other hand, when it came to religion and capitalism, believed that capitalism uh, was dysfunctional in a lot of ways for the majority of people in society, though he did not use those specific terms. He believed that religion was a diversion from the oppression, the inequality, and the exploitation that takes place in everyday life. And that religion is a tool that's used by elites in society, and that religion promotes a false consciousness. In this line of thought, people who are wealthy, people who control the means of production, they exploit the masses of people using religion as a way to legitimize that exploitation. And also, this is the ideology or the beliefs of religion are used to make people feel obligated to follow the beliefs of a given religion. Karl Marx is quoted as saying that religion is the opiate of the people. Uh, More specifically, religious suffering is at one and the same time the expression of real suffering and a protest against real suffering. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of a soulless condition. It is the opium of the people. When we look at religion, we can also see that there is a religious stratification. Cosman and Latchman conducted a national study entitled One Nation Under God, and they were able to show how religion can influence the stratification, the class stratifications that we have in society from top to bottom. And in their book, One Nation Under God, they show that at the very top, you see those who are among the Jewish faith. At the bottom, they have Jehovah's Witnesses. And so you see that religion and the beliefs of religion and the consequences of religion have an influence upon one's social status and position within a hierarchy. Today, we're also going to talk more specifically about the Jewish faith and practice. There is what's known as Jewish philosophy. The word philosophy is a combination of two words. The first is phileo, which means love, and Sophie, which means wisdom. So philosophy means the love of wisdom. A man by the name of Moses Maimonides is famous, uh, most famous of the Jewish philosophers. He set forth a number of tenets of the Jewish philosophy. He was a proponent of Aristotle, and the interpretation of Jewish faith was informed by Aristotelian philosophy. That God was a pure spirit, the doctrine of the resurrection from the dead. He was skeptical of the meaning of philosophy and preserved and defended the Torah. So he sought to develop a Jewish creed, something that all Jews could believe it, believe in, and commit to memory and recite, often to reinforce the tenets of that creed. This is what the Jewish creed contained, according to belief in the existence of the Creator, perfect and the primary cause of all things, a belief in God as absolute and unparalleled in unity, believe God is pure spirit and not affected by the physical world, that God is lives in eternity. He has always existed and always will. It is imperative to worship God exclusively and worship no other gods. God communicates with man through prophecy, and the prophecies of Moses are a priority. Divine origin of the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Bible, of the scriptures. The immutability of the Torah, that is unchangeable. A belief in divine omniscience and providence, that God is all knowing, and God is the source from whom all things come. A belief that there is a divine reward and retribution, reward for good, retribution and punishment for evil, and a belief in the Messiah and the Messianic era. There's also what's known as Jewish mysticism. Uh, this occurred during the same period as the European Middle Ages. Jewish rabbis speculated that signs were hidden in the Bible text. They looked at specific texts relating to subjects such as Ezekiel's chariot. It provided an insight into the divine nature of God, a portal to the spiritual realm, practices that brought ecstasy, visions, and out of the body experiences. Between the 7th and 11th centuries, a number of ascetic practices emerged around this idea of Jewish mysticism. There was fasting, and there was ritual purity, and magical chants. All of these were practices that emerged out of this era of Jewish mysticism. There's also the book of creation, Sefer Yetzirah, the book about the nature of creation. That God created the universe following 32 mystical pathways. And 32 pathways are tied to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And this constitutes a code that is hidden within the writings of the original text of the Bible. The Old Testament originally was translated into Hebrew and Chaldee. And so those original letters in the original text were a code according to the Jewish mystics. The Hebrew alphabet were divided into classes of letters linked with elements of fire, water, and air. And the alphabet were also linked with the parts of the human body. Within Jewish mysticism, there's also this notion of the great chain of being. It was influenced by the philosophy of Plato. The teachings of Plato were linked with the plenitude or fullness of creation. The creation contains all possible forms of existence. Static, that creation is complete, and temporalized, that the fullness gradually increases over time. So that this constitutes the forms of existence according to the beliefs of Jewish mysticism. There are 3 main centers of Jewish mysticism. In the Middle Ages, The main centers of Jewish mysticism were in Germany, South France, and Spain. German mystics were fascinated with the nature of God. They believed the nature of God was beyond human reasoning, that the Bible contained interpretations of truth hidden from ordinary man. And they would embark on a quest for the vision of God's glory. They practiced pious living, ethical behavior, humility, and altruism. The highest honor was martyrdom, and this was the epitome of among the German mystics. In southern France, there was the Kabbalah and the Kabbalistic beliefs. It flourished in southern France in the 12th century, and the Kabbalistic text is known as the Bahir. The Bahir was used to interpret the book of creation. Isaac the Blind was a member of the Kabbalah community, a significant leader. And in Spain, the Kabbalah became accepted as the divine will was the first emanation of the divine being. The word or intellect is not the most significant manifestation of God. Soren Kierkegaard, a 19th century Christian thinker and philosopher, um, the God of Abraham is not the God of the philosophers, according to Kierkegaard. Existence precedes the essence of God. And Kierkegaard rejected the assumption of the Neoplatonic and Aristotelian philosophies. The Neoplatonic mysticism, all existence emanates from God, and the Aristotelian mysticism, that God is perfect and absolute. The key ideas of Judaism. There is the relationship of God and man, that all humans share a common heritage. God created the world out of nothing. God is sovereign and all owe their existence to him. God cannot be seen, and God reveals himself to man. There's also what's known as the Code of Hammurabi. It was compiled by the king of Babylon in 1700 or the 18th century, discovered during the excavation of Susa in southern Iran between 1901 and 1902. Was discovered by a French archaeologist and taken to Louvre, France. The Code of Hammurabi is compared with the Law of Moses. There are two key concepts of the code, and they are criminal justice, retribution based on retaliation, and statutes with no respecter of persons. That means that status was not the determining factor in terms of whether or not a person is tried or prosecuted or punished for crime. No one was above the law. How was the law of Hammurabi applied? There was no respecter of persons. That means that your status would not save you from being convicted, tried, and punished for crimes. The laws applied equally with regard to one's wealth, education, social status, and that was a very salient feature of the law of Hammurabi. Human beings are treated like objects. In the law of Moses, humans are treated like individuals and not objects. In contrast, there are three classes or castes governed by unique laws. There are the aristocrats, the commoners, and slaves. Each class is also subdivided even further, and each class is governed by unique laws and merit different punishment. Property rights were also a very significant part of the Code of Hammurabi. Children are guarded as property, and there are no strict punishments for damage or loss of property. Uh, and, and there is an attempt to provide equal punishment for loss of property. Uh, Comparison with the law of Moses: if a slave is harmed, he should be freed. Slaves are treated like human beings with rights. Slaves should be protected, and children are not punished for the deeds of their parents. Each person is responsible for their own crimes. The law of Moses is based on principle, not literal meaning. There is no intent to enact revenge, no revenge in the law of Moses. The Jewish calendar dates back to 3,760 years before the birth of Christ. Jewish calendar uses a combination of lunar and solar calendars. Jewish months are 29 to 30 days in length. The Jewish calendar operates on a 19-year rotation, 12 years of 12 months, 7 years of 13 months, and leap years are in the 11th, 14th, 17th, and 19th years. And the Jewish months are listed in your slides, and they correspond with the Roman months of the year. There are 6 holy days in Judaism. There's Rosh Hashanah that commemorates the creation of the world and the opening of the book of life. It is communal and celebrated in the synagogue. There's Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, where the Jewish people ask for forgiveness. They fast and pray, and it's considered the holiest of the Jewish days. There's Hanukkah, a time of joy and blessing, lighting of the menorah, remembering a miracle during the revolt against the Syrians, compared with Christians. There's also Pesach, the feast of Passover. It is the liberation of the Hebrews after 430 years of Egyptian bondage. It is commemorated with unleavened bread, a Seder meal, of symbolic foods. And there is Purim. Purim is related to the story of Esther, when the Jews were delivered from annihilation by a man by the name of Haman. And there's Sivan, the harvest festival that celebrates the reception of the 10 Commandments by Moses. It is a family meal. It centers around the home and the reading of the Torah, very similar to that of the Feast of Passover or Pesach. It is centered around the home in comparison to Rosh Hashanah, which is more practiced within the Jewish synagogue. Jewish prayer. Prayer is a very significant part of the Jewish faith. Jews practice both individual and communal prayers. Avodah Shibalev, Hebrew for service that is in the heart. That when it comes to prayer, it is not just the words, but it is the intent of the heart. That is a very significant part of that. Jewish prayer in the synagogue is similar to Christian liturgy. There are daily prayers in some synagogues. Some prayers require at least 10 men. Women and men are separate when it comes to Jewish prayer. The Jewish synagogue is the center of Jewish worship today. At one time, there was an ancient temple, first built by Solomon, the son of David, who killed Goliath and became king. That temple was destroyed. It was then later rebuilt and destroyed by the Romans. and to this day, there no temple exists. So Jewish faith and practice revolves around what's known as the synagogue. It is a holy structure where the Jews practice their faith. The first temple was built, as I said earlier, by Solomon and was destroyed under the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar. The second temple was built by King Herod and destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. And the synagogues became the most significant place and structure of Jewish worship. There are three elements of the synagogue: the ark, where the scrolls of the Torah are stored, the lectern, from behind, worship is led and sermons are preached, and the lamp that symbolizes the menorah that stood before the ark. Jewish dress codes and dietary laws are very important. There is the kappa, Hebrew for skull cap, worn by Jewish men during worship, also known as the yarmulke. And yarmulke is Yiddish, which is a dialect of Hebrew for skull cap. And there is the talit. It is a prayer shawl described in the Bible. There are 613 fringes symbolizing the number of Jewish laws. There's what's known as phylacteries. Men and women strap a leather box on their arm containing 4 passages from the Torah. And there's the concept of kosher. Kosher is the ritual slaughter of animals. There's to be no pain. The animals are rendered unconscious, and there's an instantaneous death. The meat is completely drained of blood, no pork, no shellfish, nothing that eats on the bottom of the ocean or the bottom of a pond or lake. So things that are considered kosher are acceptable in Judaism. So there's kosher food, there's kosher vegetables as well. Jewish Sabbath and the family. The Sabbath is every week. Each religion has its own Sabbath. In Judaism, it's Saturday. In Islam, it's Friday, and in Christianity, Sunday. Being born of a Jewish mother makes one Jewish. Boys are circumcised on the 8th day after their birth. There is a bar mitzvah at the age of 13 for boys, and this is where boys become part of the covenant of the religious faith, of the Jewish faith. There is bat mitzvah for girls who become 13, where they become children of the covenant that God made with his people. Jewish marriage. Jews are permitted only to marry other Jews, not to marry outside of their faith. If they marry outside their faith, that person is required to convert. And there are what's known as proselyte Jews, those who were at once Gentiles who actually become Jews. Jewish burial is within 24 hours. There are no cremations. There is no embalming. And this is a cultural aspect of Jewish burial. There's also what's known as the kibbutz. It is a communal settlement of Jews, and they provide a community that provides for all the needs of Jewish families. They share the work. There's care for the children. All of the needs of a Jewish community are met within this idealized community referred to as the kibbutz. So this week we are talking about the Jewish faith. along with economics and religion in society. If you have any questions regarding this lecture or anything within the readings, do email me at dmonk@se.edu.